be a very
Okay, so thank you so much, Dr. Smriti, and all the learners. Welcome to this presentation. And today we'll be discussing mostly about participatory risk assessment, perception of vulnerability, vulnerability identification, and related issues. See, earlier we had one session on risk, risk assessment methods and things like that. And I'm sure you must have gone through the reading materials which has been provided to you. So we will try to cover 4 units today for the next 2 hours. So basically, this we will also try to make it more interactive. So can you hear? I mean, see my presentation? Am I audible?
Yes, doctor, you are
Yes, you
audible
can
on
see.
the slide.
Okay, all fine, no? So good.
Yeah, it's okay.
So we will proceed. See, there are so many risk drivers. So as such, because of various factors like population growth, I don't know, perhaps you must have seen this, deforestation or climate change, or even the infrastructure which are being created. They are not disaster resistant. Many a time they are very fragile because of various societal issues like corruption or no so many extraneous factors, and also the system failures. So those things are being created, and then there is also poverty and inequality and the greater urbanization. All these factors are there. So these are all increasing the risk of the people. So the thing is that we need to reduce this risk, and one of the best ways to reduce this risk is through people's participation, through participatory methods. And we are going to discuss those issues. And defining risk, as you have already known, there are 3 factors. One is hazard and the vulnerabilities, and the larger number of people are exposed, then there are lot more of risk. So risk assessment again is the process of determining the nature and scale of no scale of losses due to a hazardous events. So that is what is the quantum of no loss, the likely estimated loss. That is what is the risk assessment. Involves analysis of both theoretical and empirical data. So how many people are affected, how much of buildings are affected, no, the area which is affected, infrastructure affected, all this needs to be analyzed. And risk assessment, many a time we have to also the identification of natural hazards and the probability of its occurrences. How many times, what type of hazards are there in your locality, and what is the frequency and intensity of these events occurring, and what happens, the chain of event processes and pathways that connect the cause to the effect. What causes, why this see, if you have recently seen so many earthquakes which has happened, and they have turned into disasters because mainly of the buildings which have been created, perhaps not using the right technologies or right building codal provisions. So that needs to be looked at. The relationship between the characteristics of the natural hazard and the type and magnitude of its effect. So if the, say for example, flood occurs, are you having sufficient warning for that? What type of how much of time you are getting before the occurrence as far as the warning is concerned? So all these needs, and then what is the magnitude? how much of area is going to be affected, what is the type, is it a flash flood, is it cloud burst, or is it no floods due to dam burst, or even no from the sea rise, so because of the waves. So we need to understand those. So when we speak about risk and vulnerabilities, it is important to understand the concept of community. So what is community? First and foremost, no, it is actually a naturally ordered entity. So normally it is and so it is a natural, just like family, and there are many people living. But society is quite different. It is again no, it is in relation to institutions which are existing. What type of organizations are there? So there is a difference between the community, which is naturally natural entity, and there is a social entity, social relationship based society, that is also there, that needs to be understood. And when we speak about these things, there is a concept of social capital. What is social capital? So risk and vulnerability has what a direct relationship between the social capital and the type of networks which are existing there, the cohesion among the members of the community is divided or is it unified? If it is unified, the society, the community is able to face any type of adversities with a collective strength. But on the contrary, if you have a community that is divided among various lines, maybe no, maybe community lines, or based on how, I mean, the property situation, or cultural issues. So then, no, the community may be more vulnerable. So social capital refers to the collective value of social networks and inclinations that arise from this network to do things for each other. So many of the places we have seen, where whenever there are disasters and the community is united and they are able to face this adversity in a united manner, then their resilience and the vulnerability is reduced. So it is important to understand we should have social capital. We should develop social capital among the various communities. For that, we need to remove the divisions. We need to work for unity, cohesion, and building team work among the communities, no, building understanding among the communities. Those are very, very important issues, and social capital is a very, very important concept which gives rise, or it reduces the vulnerabilities. So what are the implications of this social capital as far as the vulnerability and risk are concerned? Communities with a higher level of social, human, physical capitals were found to react more effectively to disaster situations. So in during the COVID also, many countries we have seen, many of the countries have fought united. But in some countries, there were issues on the lines of communities or religion-based issues. So those were not a very conducive environment for managing. So normally, whenever the community is having leadership, cohesion, and network, and they live in peace and harmony, then they are able to manage the disasters in a very, very united manner. The greater one's social contacts, the more one is likely to receive more information regarding potential hazards. If you have networks, interactions, and then you may be able to get a warning on time. You may be able to understand what type of no disaster response arrangements are being made. So this helps. Study of evacuation behaviors over time gives the idea that community ties often replace kinship ties in case of emergencies. So if you have no, even if you belong to various type of caste or kinships, many times the community people, irrespective of the affiliations in terms of kinship or caste or religions, they are able to help each other and tide over the situation. So this is again an important issue. Rationale for people's participation. Why should people participate in risk reduction or risk analysis or vulnerability reduction? What is the what do you feel? What is the need for the people to participate? Why should people participate in risk reduction activities? What do you feel? Anybody would like to share your views? What do you feel? Should the community participate in no participate in risk reduction, risk management? What is your experience? Anybody would like to share?
Yes, doctor.
Yeah, come
I
on.
think yes. What I feel that if community should participate because they are more aware of their problems and they are more aware of the terrain and they
Mhm.
are in the good position to identify those risks that
Okay.
is surrounding them. And if they are being if they are allowed to participate, that will make them to feel like the plan belongs to them. And also when the
Correct.
implementation stage comes, they will participate actively because they are in the clear picture when the plan is done.
Okay. So that is very good. You have spoken about various issues like people's ownership. They feel that it is their this thing, and they have been living those places for some time. They have the experience, knowledge, understanding of the situation. They know what type of resources. So all these things. So this calls for people's participation in risk reduction activities. So the rationale for people's participation, local community is the first affected by disasters. Whenever there is a disaster, it is the community which is affected, and they are the first respondents. As you said, they are the first respondents. The government and other agencies to reach the place, it takes time. And then there is also there's a concept called golden hour in disaster risk reduction or disaster response, wherein the first hour of disaster is very important for the people to manage the disaster event. If they are able to provide response within the first hour of disaster, there are chances, the affected people's chance of survival is 300% more. So as such, the golden hour help comes from the local people. So they have the experience, they have the resources. Many of these communities, the risk-prone communities, have their own resources in terms of whatever is like tractors or vehicles or communication systems and their networks. Those are available. So because of all this, it is important. Apart from what you have already mentioned, the ownership, the belongingness, know their motivation, they feel that it is their work. So as such, it is important that community participation is very important. And there are certain key concepts for community based risk reduction activities. People's participation and empowerment in achieving sustainable development and sharing its benefits. So people contributes in the people's participatory process. People contribute in achieving and strengthening the system. The community and its most vulnerable groups are primarily addressed. So the when you do the
Doctor,
community-based
what
risk
is
reduction,
CBDRM, doctor?
it is community-based disaster risk management.
Okay,
It
sir.
is community-based disaster risk management, wherein the community is involved and they understand who are the vulnerable people, which are the areas most vulnerable to various type of hazardous events. And in this process, the outside agencies, they normally act as facilitators, and mostly the work needs to be done by the community itself. So why we should know recognition of imperative of community involvement? See, many times many of the developmental activities we do it from the government headquarters without taking into consideration the people's needs and without involving them. And many of these top down approaches have failed. So when you don't consider the people's requirement, needs, and their involvement, these programs and projects are likely to fail. Then some of the serious defects of disaster mitigation programs implemented using top down approaches include failure to involve people. In many cases we have seen in many no slum settlement rehabilitation programs wherein they used to rear the animals, and some of the government agencies, they have built multi-story buildings for them, but it was not suitable for these people. And what they have done after getting these houses, they sold off. So without understanding the real needs of the people, they are likely to fail. Failure to address vulnerabilities. So exactly the people, local people understand the local vulnerabilities. And many times, if people are not involved, it is susceptible to manipulation and it brings in more corruption. So these type of problems are there. So in general elements of bottom up approach, local people are capable of initiating and sustaining their own community development. Strategy will
Good.
include broad based local participation.
Yes, sir. Good day, sir.
Yeah, good day.
Yeah.
You want to share something?
Yeah. Sure. I have I have a concern. For vulnerability, is it that it's just fixed on specific people, or it's determined by the condition of people? Where it's actually what should I say? It's an input on the Yeah, it's an input from the condition of the environment that we see, because basically not just old people, sick people, or children can be vulnerable. Everyone can be vulnerable depending on the condition that they find themselves. Like for example, you made mention of the slum, especially in
Yeah.
Sierra Leone. Especially in Sierra Leone, much of the slums, it's actually close to huge landfills or
Okay.
deposit areas for trash or those things, and they actually link directly with burning of this waste. So there is much fumes and environmental pollution towards them. Is it the old people or the young people as babies, or ill-health people that are only vulnerable, or the whole population living around that place? That's my question, sir, because we had um, a lesson yesterday wherein it was just fixed about only women, the babies, and the old people are vulnerable. In this scenario, is everyone vulnerable or just those people?
See, vulnerable, actually, most of the people are vulnerable to disaster situations. See, you spoke about the informal settlements which are near the landfills. So if people as a whole, they are all vulnerable because of their location. They are physically vulnerable. And apart from that, social vulnerability may be more among differently abled or women and especially vulnerable groups. So there are various ways of looking at vulnerability. We are coming to that component. There are various aspects of vulnerability. See, that one is the locational or physical vulnerability. Because of the landfill, they are living in informal settlements in the landfill areas. So as such, everyone is vulnerable in that settlement. But if you rank the vulnerability among the various subgroups, like women, children, differently abled or old, so they may be a little more vulnerable because of social factors or emotional factors, organizational factors. There are so many other factors. So vulnerability is not just physical vulnerability and not just social vulnerability. So we need to understand from a comprehensive viewpoint. That's all what I would like to share with you. Is that
Okay.
is what we have discussed? Is it you are able
Can I
to
add
get
something, doctor?
clarity?
I want to chip in.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes.
Okay, I want to a little bit clear his misconception about yesterday's that he was talking is only women and children are vulnerable. No, is
No.
that based on
No.
that
No. Am I
scenario?
yesterday? Did I talk
No,
about?
not you, doctor. That is, I want to clear his misconception, sir. If I'm allowed.
Yeah. Yeah. You are allowed. There is no problem. See.
Okay, sir. Okay, 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 sir. What
Absolutely.
I
You
want
go
him
ahead.
to,
You are saying that
yeah,
you heard that only women are vulnerable.
no, that is not what was said. But based on the scenario we were discussing yesterday, we said that women and children are more vulnerable in most of the disaster situation. But what I want him to understand is that the vulnerability depends on the types of disaster that is approaching that community.
Yeah.
Being ignorant also is being a vulnerable. Like in
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
environment
Absolutely.
where I
Absolutely.
am in Nigeria, northeastern, you will find out most of the youth are ignorant of the real knowledge of the religion. So they were
Ah.
easily manipulated and engaged in social vices.
Okay.
That being ignorance makes them to be vulnerable, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So
Now,
I feel in each case we need to make an analysis assessment. So it is not across the board, but perhaps the speaker might have talked to you about the research findings. In the research findings, they must have found that women and children, they make the people who are dying or not having resources, the women and children outnumber the other sections globally. So basing on that, perhaps the speaker would have talked about the vulnerability issues and who are more vulnerable. But it is not across the board. Each case you have to make a study in each situation. In some places, women may not be more vulnerable. So it depends. Am I clear?
yes, sir, you are clear.
Okay,
Yes,
thank
sir.
you so much. Um, so we spoke about these issues, and anybody else want to add any other comments? Those who have joined late, any of you? Okay, if not, we will continue. Shall we continue?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think somebody has raised the hand. Tombe. Mr. Tombe, you have raised your hand. You want to say something?
Yes, I wanted to say something. Anyway, in the first place, I really need to apologize. I've just joined, and yesterday I was very far from my location. I actually had to travel back
Okay.
to the location where I am, and I reached safely. Based on this topic of vulnerability, yes, I agree with you and Brother Adamo
Okay.
on the aspect of the issues of the analysis of vulnerability. Uh, in humanitarian interventions, vulnerability analyzed based on the context of that particular
Absolutely, absolutely. I totally agree with you.
geographical areas. It can
Yeah,
be as a fact of disasters. It can be based on the social needs of that location. This is generally how vulnerabilities are measured.
You have said it right. It is contextual, basically, as you said. Okay, so let us proceed. So we spoke about the need for having a bottom-up approach. Why people should participate in risk reduction, vulnerability, no disaster mitigation activities? Because see, local people are capable of initiating and sustaining their own community development. And bottom-up strategies will include broad-based local participation, comprehensive planning, and in the decision making. Suppose they are planning to do some risk mitigation or risk reduction activities, then the needs of the local community are taken into consideration. But if you are using a top down approach, the community very often are not consulted, so their needs and requirements are not normally met. And in the bottom up approach, people are also given orientation, they are given training, and these things also further reduce the vulnerabilities. So it is important that we use this bottom up approach. Emphasis should be on improving and improving the utilization management of local resources. So even for risk reduction activities, the local resources should be used, local skills should be used. Again, it will increase the employability, employment opportunities, and financial assistance to the people. So this again will reduce the vulnerabilities. Responsible utilization of outside financial assistance is also required. And if you depend too much on outside resources, this is going to increase the vulnerabilities in terms of no debt trap and things like that. Responsibility for change rests with those living in the community. So that is another issue. Local people should participate actively in the preparation of the plans and their implementation and their decision making. So people needs to be involved and in a very participatory manner in the micro level. So earlier the concept was people affected by disasters are helpless victims, and people thought that all the disasters are active. But the thing is that they have their capabilities, they can plan, they can mobilize resources. Earlier the thinking was victims are passive recipients of external aid. So people's capacities are used and built on through their participation. So many times even the rehabilitation programs, they may not be, sometimes they are not able to provide financial resources, but they are able to provide their labor and so as such they are able to contribute. So this again builds in the concept of ownership. They feel proud that they have involved themselves, they have contributed in the entire rehabilitation process, and they will like to maintain that one. Damage and need assessments are rapidly done. By earlier, the thinking was that the damage need assessments will be done by experts. But now the concept is that people who are affected, they need to be involved in the damage and need assessment. So they know what exactly has happened in the community, what exactly their needs are, what are the gender and other cultural issues. So that is being appreciated by the local community. So hence it is important that we involve them. Then earlier the focus was on physical and material aid. Now the focus is also on motivation aspects, training, addressing the root causes of vulnerabilities. What are the root causes of vulnerabilities? We have earlier discussed this issue, like the poverty, lack of resources. We will come to that again. So this can be better understood and assessed and strengthened by the local community. Donors decide what the victims need. That was the thinking early, but community members' participation in decision making and prioritize. Suppose you have limited resources for rehabilitation or restoration work. So the community will be able to tell you as to what their priorities are. Goal is to meet emergency needs. So that was the thinking earlier. But now the disaster response and rehabilitation activities should focus on long-term vulnerability reduction activities, increasing the coping capabilities and resilience of the community. So that should be also done. And there are tools available for this. So for example, to know the priorities of the community members, we may ask the community members to prioritize as to what their most important needs are. Then historical transit, to learn about histories of disasters. Again, you involved the local community. You talk to them about various type of hazardous events which have occurred in your locality, and they will be able to tell you, and from that we are able to understand the issue. Metric to determine the hazard that has most impact on the community. So this all can be done when you involve the community. So in this process, as I think many of you are also working in civil society organizations. So civil society organizations have a very important role to play. Acha, you want to say something, Mr. Tom? You want to share something?
Yes, I actually wanted to share a practical example based on these issues of vulnerability and how best some organizations have so far worked on these issues, and when it comes to response. Last year, I just wanted to share a practical example that we worked about on this issue of vulnerability. Yeah, last year in one of the countryside that we have in area where I'm working, we have as a result of drought, we have a community. There is a Payam where we are operating. These people, they moved. Majority, let me say, 70% of these communities were affected due to issues of drought. They had to migrate. They moved. Then when our team went on ground, we did what we call need assessment. And in the process, when we are conducting need assessment, it was actually the need assessment was done, and we also, during that process, we happen to have what we call we also involve most of these communities in this process, and that one, it is regarded as it's a community-based, participatory aspect of methodology. We have used that, and in our findings, we realized that, as you mentioned, that when you are assessing vulnerability of community, there are certain things that you need not to impose on them. You need
Absolutely.
not to impose on them. They should be the one to suggest what is best for themselves.
Okay.
And when we did all this, they happens to point out for us exactly what they really like most, and how best they can be supported. And when we develop concept this year, some of our donors were able to, accept they came up with some small grant, of which
Okay.
we really supported these people due to this issue of drought. We happens to give them, we gave them, we did food distributions, and we also supported them in aspect of health interventions. It's it is a drought related thing. They are also having issues of uh, diseases. We respond. We respond also on the aspect of the livestock. As a result of flood. I mean, as a result of drought, animals are dying because of this. We also supported them in this aspect. And just I wanted to relate this on the issues of vulnerability. When you are accessing, when you want to have vulnerability assessment, it has to be community-based kind of method should be the one to be used. Otherwise, you can craft a concept. At the end of the day, you find yourself responding, but your response is not based on the needs of the people that are in that location.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you. I
So
believe
thank
you
you.
in the need assessment, you would have had also a representative from the community, perhaps local people.
Yes, for sure. We use these community-based participatory methods
Okay.
during the process of this need assessment.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. That is a very nice example. And we would like to have, I mean, hear from others also, in case you have done similar work or in some of the areas. So this will help, everyone better understand the concept. Anybody else you would like to share? Thank you so much. Okay. So let us continue, and in the process, we'll share again. So in this process, so the civil society organizations, the NGOs, and community-based organizations, they need to act as facilitators. They have to work along with the people and act as facilitators. That is very, very important. That is an important role in many of the disaster situations. Now, risk reduction through community action. How we can reduce the community risk through various activities at the community level. So one is that community-based early warning system. See, initially when we spoke about disaster response issues, we spoke about the one of the important disaster response activities, early warning. So how the community can develop an early warning system based on their language and culture and system. So this can be developed through community involvement. Then community-based risk reduction activities. After identifying what all things to be done, they can prioritize. Then community awareness programs. So we can use the local local cultural programs as a means of generating awareness, cooperation between government and community. So this type of actions can be done through community involvement. For example, community awareness, you can use like local folk music, street plays, no school teachers participation, children's participation, slogan writing, rallies. So this type of activities again you can contextualize against the various type of hazards, and the local community can be very much involved in this process. Awareness and songs, some of the places they can use this street plays, so that can be an effective effective means of communicating the message of risk reduction, or awareness rallies, or you can also use do's and don'ts, what needs to be done and what not to be done during a disaster. This can again be used through what I mean this painting, awareness programs. So this can be, there can be training programs. So through this we can share a lot of this. And community meetings, you have I believe you have the local self government, local no local type of government programs and systems. So they can have local community meetings in no, and then you can share the issues with them. We can also have like a community level preparedness. We can have a community disaster management committees formed. You can also use various task forces in the community, local community. You can have various task forces, maybe for early warning, search and rescue, or first aid, or transportation, or temporary shelter. This type of things can be done at the community level and also at the family and individual level. So this, that process needs to be initiated, and the intermediary agencies like the NGOs or civil society organizations can act as a catalyst for this. And then this village disaster management committees or even this type of teams can be developed for information dissemination, search and rescue, first aid. And each of these teams can have some members, and each team can have some leader. And these teams can be given training on no on information sharing, search and rescue, or relief distribution, and things like that. So this type of a process will help the community to reduce the vulnerabilities, and risk reduction activities can be done. And task forces, so when you involve the people in the process of making the task forces, and what are the issues, they will be able to present that one. So you can also use like a village like signboards and things like that. The important contact numbers can be displayed in some of the important buildings in the local community, so that with the help of these numbers, these local people are able to access disaster response services in a very effective manner. That is also possible. Participatory risk assessment methods. So there are how do you go about doing the risk assessment? There are few methods are there. One is based on workshop based methods. So appreciation, influence, control, which is a workshop based technique encouraging the stakeholders to consider the social, political, economic, and cultural factors along with the technical and economic aspect that influence a given area. So this is you call the various stakeholders, have a workshop with them, and you discuss with them the social issues, the political issues, the economic aspect, cultural factors, along with the technical this one. So you can also call experts, and expert, maybe a geologist, maybe a flood specialist, and persons in this workshop. And this helps the participants in identifying a common purpose. Suppose they understand that there is a major issue of flooding, so they either they can have flood walls, or they can relocate themselves, or they can prepare a plan. So this type of things can be done through this. So here all the stakeholders are involved through a participatory workshop method. It is done. Then there is another method, objective-oriented project planning. It's a management method that encourages participatory planning and analysis with a series of stakeholder workshops for assessing the risk. So understanding and assessing the risk of the local community. Again, you have this participatory learning programs, and in this technique, stakeholders could come together in a series of workshops to set priorities and plan for risk assessment and implementation and monitoring. So in this, the stakeholders come together and they prioritize as to what is to be done. Suppose there are recurrent droughts in the area. So what should be the priority? Maybe water harvesting or recharging or check dams or whatever other technically sound methods. So that can be implemented, and then again they will decide as to how it needs to be monitored. So that is there. Then there are also community-based methods, like community-based methods wherein the government departments undertake participatory risk assessment work with local communities. So I think one of you have spoken about this issue. You have involved the local community for assessment of risk. And we normally use, there is something known as participatory risk assessment methods. There are PRA tools. Earlier it was rapid assessment tools, rural rapid assessment tools, but slowly it has developed into participatory rural appraisal methods, and now it is participatory learning methods. So participatory research methodologies are used for this. And again, community-led actions are also undertaken. So there is a personal or collective experience, and there is a social exchange, and this may be available through quotes and stories and visuals. And even if the people are not educated, literate, doesn't matter, they can involve themselves. Everyone has what their knowledge, experience, and understanding, and we can involve everyone through this process. And there are various techniques. It's a tool to facilitate collective learning by taking community through an experience for the social exchange of information, analysis of information for the creation of community action. So here we call the various stakeholders in the local community, bring them together, and we have an exchange of information analysis. And this tools are used, participatory tools are used. So there are certain principles. So there is a first principle, it is triangulation. So triangulation means you get the information not only from one source, you get the information from three sources. So maybe from the community, maybe from the secondary information, or from the offices, and also from the research. And you understand and you triangulate and see whether these informations are matching. And if they are not matching, then you may verify that. So that triangulation method is there, and is flexible use. So if the information is received, it is not necessary that you have to use them, and you can also use, you can adapt. And this is a process normally done through a face-to-face interaction, and it is done on the site itself. So normally the reversal of learning, basically people think that there are experts, they understand better. But in this participatory process, we believe that people have the knowledge, people have better understanding, people have experience. So they are the best people. So they are the best source of knowledge. So we have to do the reversal of learning, and investigation is done from various sources. So this is a PRA method we can do, and there are various tools for that. For example, one is social mapping. So you identify, suppose you go to a locality, you bring the people together, their cross section of people together with their leaders, and you tell them to draw the settlement pattern or settlement of the particular locality. So they will know, they will identify the houses, number of houses, the government infrastructure or the NGO infrastructure or the religious infrastructures. Those will be identified. They will draw that one using the local resources, maybe the powder, the sand, the leaves. So all these things will be used for drawing the settlement map, and then that will be presented to the larger community. And they may also identify the hazard prone areas and risk prone areas. They may also identify the vulnerable groups, and that will be presented to the larger community. So this type of social mapping can be done, or they can do timeline analysis. They can also do the resource mapping, what type of resources are there in the community. So, and these resources can be categorized, or they can do the hazard mapping. So what type of hazards are there, and then they will say that they can also rank the hazards. What is the biggest hazard in the locality? Again, depending on the people's perception, understanding. Many places, recurrent hazards are considered as the biggest hazard, but sometimes these are not factually correct. Sometimes even no hazardous events which may occur infrequently may be having much more risk, but as per the people's understanding, it may vary. So you can also do the triangulation and also share your inputs with them also. Then timeline analysis, the hazardous event history can be again discussed, and they can list down what in the year 2022 what has happened, in the year 2021 what all hazardous events have happened. So like that you can have a like maybe 50-year history. So because the people who are experienced, they will be able to tell you about what type of hazardous event have occurred, how much of area has been affected, how it was managed, what were the issues. So all this, so timeline analysis can be done, or even seasonality diagram, in what no which season what type of events occur. So that can be done, seasonality diagram. Month wise we can have various type of hazards in the locality that can be identified as per the people's perception. Then you can also go you can use another method called transit walk. The hazard prone areas can be visited from the perspective of the various hazards and what are the impacts it is creating. So that can be analyzed. Then you can also identify the type of institutions that are existing through Venn diagram. So, and what type of role they are playing, which is the most important institution. So according to people's perception, from the perspective of disaster risk reduction and response, or even mitigation. So that can also be, so this type of methods wherein the involvement of the people is a must, and they take the ownership. Their local leader will be able to facilitate this, and you have to, as intermediaries, the government or the NGOs may support this process. So that is also an important issue. Then in our, we have done in our areas so much of community based disaster risk reduction process, wherein we have selected villages. We have done the hazard vulnerability and capacity assessment through PRA technique. We have done this awareness and community based planning, implementation, and monitoring. This type of process we have done in some of our places, and I am sure you must be also doing this one, as you have already mentioned, and the effects are long lasting. So when we have selected the villages, we have selected the disaster prone villages. This the areas which are more affected, the people who are interested in supporting and cooperating, those were selected. So, and we have done this hazard vulnerability and capacity analysis, like timeline analysis has been done in these settlements, and they ranked basing on their perception, they ranked when the cross section of the people have come together and they have made a ranking of the hazard. What is the biggest hazard in the locality? And hazard and vulnerability mapping, hazard calendar like seasonality diagram. And what are the roles being played by the various gender, women? As you know, women, yesterday you also discussed about that issue. Women are more vulnerable in many cases. So what is their role? How they are affected? That is also, and many cases we have also seen the poor people are more affected by disasters. So we have also tried to identify the most vulnerable in terms of economic condition through wealth ranking. Again, this wealth ranking has been done from the perspective of people, from their perception. So this type of identification can help you understand the vulnerable groups and vulnerable issues. So I would like to maybe we can take 5 minutes break and see, or you want to discuss anything so far? Otherwise, we will go for 2-3 minutes break and then we will resume. Is that okay?
Yes, sir. Okay, sir.
Yes, that is fine.
Yes,
We'll
sir.
take
Yes,
2 minutes
sir.
break.
It's okay, sir. It's okay, sir.
Okay. Yeah. So, are you all back?
Yes, we are back.
Okay. Can we resume?
Yes, doctor. We
Okay.
can resume. Yeah.
So these are community-based approaches, and there is also another method that is called self-esteem, associative strength, resourcefulness, action planning, and responsibility. So I think the others, no, you can put off the mic. There's a lot of echo.
Adamo.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Mute yourself.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Sir, I was asking.
No. Tell me anything you want to ask. Hello. Okay, fine.
No,
Okay. So you want to intervene?
No, sir. Actually, I was just asking Adamu to mute his mic.
Okay. Fine.
Nothing.
So welcome back. We are going to resume the second part of the presentation today, and we are discussing about another method. And as I said, it is self-esteem, associative strength, resourcefulness, and action planning and responsibility method. It builds on local knowledge, strength, and local capacity to assess, prioritize, plan, and create and organize and evaluate risk reduction activities. So it has got 5 components. One is self-esteem, and what so they say that what strengths they have, what are the strong areas, and associative strengths in the community, what type of social capital is there, what are the resources they are having, and then they go for planning as far as the risk reduction is concerned. And once they decide as to what type of action needs to risk reduction activity needs to take up, then the responsibility is given to certain agencies within the community, so or given to certain leaderships, and then it is implemented, and no, it is evaluated. So that process is there. So it provides a multi-sector, multi-level approach to team building through training. So again, in this process, team building is also takes place, and also sectoral various agencies are involved, and people are encouraged to participate, and the local experts are involved. So this in a process empowers the community to initiate action. And this method is it enables people's participation of even if people are not literate or no, so to say, they can also be involved. So this is again based on interactive and visual methods, similar to what we have done in the community based process. There is another method of social analysis. It attempts at a systematic investigation of social processes and factors that affect risk, impacts, and results. So, what are the social factors which are affecting the risk? Is it marginalization of certain groups? Is it certain discriminations? Or is it non-involvement of these communities? So, this is done. Identify in this. We have to identify the key stakeholders. Then assess the social impact. So what happens because of these issues? Maybe if it is there is a discrimination between certain communities, so what is the social impact? So in case of disaster, so there may not be involvement of this community, they may be left out. So what can be done to mitigate or minimize this risk in this situation? So that will be analyzed. So that is another process. And there is also something known as gender analysis. So gender analysis focus on documenting and analyzing difference in gender roles, activities, needs, and opportunities in a given context by quantitative data in gender segment. So how the various genders are differently affected, that also can be analyzed, and what roles they are playing in case of a disaster. What is the role of women and men, and what are the opportunities in that one? So that will be analyzed. So there is also another tool called social invention. It is a social analysis facilitates social learning that stakeholders generate and internalize during the participatory planning process and implementation activity. So this process again, it allows them to learn social learning, and they invent new methods of new ways of reducing risk, and different innovative methods are brought out, and they may also look for innovative institutional arrangement for risk reduction. In this process, individually and collectively develop insight and understanding of the new behaviors required to attain objectives they set out. So in this process, new ways of risk reductions are identified, and these are collectively agreed upon, and then they identify the objectives and implement. So this type of processes are also there apart from the community CBDRM process. This type of methods are also used for vulnerability analysis, risk analysis. Now coming to the perception of vulnerability, what are the vulnerability may vary from, it may be different from what is being perceived by the community. So disasters have got actually two aspects. One is the danger or threat, that is mostly external aspect. Now the vulnerability, that is the possibility of person or good being affected. So there is a earthquake which is an external this thing, and now this is being experienced by different persons, and people may have the coping capability. If the people are aware of what is to be done and what not to be done, what resources are available with them, so they may be able to, the people who are able to have this type of resources, resilience, they may be able to better manage this type of scenarios. So there are both factors. The external danger is there, but the internal coping capability, resilience is also there. So those both the factors are important for understanding vulnerability. If the person is having the coping capability, internal strengths and knowledge and understanding and networks, so they may be able to better cope with. So as such, the vulnerability of that group will be less in comparison to the group of people who are not having this type of systems. So this both the while understanding or assessing vulnerability, we need to look at the hazard aspect and also the resilient aspect, coping capability issues. So that is to be understood. Vulnerability is viewed as comprising internal characteristics of the subject and external process contributing to differential exposure. As I already mentioned, so this varies. Now, observational and analytical framework for vulnerability. Vulnerability has two sides: an external side of risk, shocks and stress to which an individual is subject to, and internal side which is defense mechanism. So there are various factors we can look at, like the human driving force, environmental stresses, natural variability, and management systems which are existing. When you do the analysis of all this, we will be able to understand what's the situation there. So Morse has also come out with two dimension of vulnerability in his model. He has also used the concept of sensitivity and resilience. So the people are sensitive to various type of hazardous events, but at the same time, this Morse has also spoken about the resilience. Many of the communities who have been facing disasters maybe a number of years, they are able to cope, or they have a better resilience because they have the experience, they have been dealing with this one. So that also is there. And Watts has also come out with another the space of vulnerability. Their exposure has looked at the risk of exposure, how many number of people, how much of area is being affected. So that is also another issue. If in case a particular hazardous event occur in a major city and thickly populated area, so the exposure may be more, as such the vulnerability will be higher. So that also is another concept to look at. And again, vulnerability is a socially constructed phenomenon. So vulnerability is not, it is a dynamic type of a thing. It is not that no, it can also be reduced. Suppose better awareness and better systems are developed for disaster response, or disaster mitigation activities are taken up, so this vulnerability can be reduced. Sometimes because of new hazards and new vulnerable conditions, it may increase also. So it is a socially constructed terminology, and there is nothing like it is not a permanent type of thing, it is a dynamic type of a phenomenon. Now, how do we identify vulnerabilities? Okay, any of you would like to share as to how you identify vulnerabilities? How do you identify vulnerabilities? Any experience? Any one of you? How do you identify vulnerabilities in your system?
Yes, sir. I would
Yeah.
like to say people that are exposed to these dangers or hazard,
Yeah.
you get to identify them by that vulnerability, by that,
So,
like people living, staying very close to a place where there is
okay. So
where
the
there is
proximity to
probability.
hazardous terrain is one parameter. Proximity is people who are living near to hazard conditions. So that could be one parameter of identifying the vulnerability. As you said, the location issue. Anybody else?
Yes,
Yeah.
I also can I contribute as well?
Absolutely. Everyone is welcome to contribute.
Yeah, from our side, I actually worked on this context of community where issues of vulnerability is common.
Yeah.
As we do interventions, we normally identify vulnerability based on, as my colleague said, based on the location. That is
Okay.
one. The occurrence of, like, for instance, in our site, if there is a natural occurring related issues like the experience I've shared, drought. And then in that specific community, what we normally looked at, those that are the most affected in when it comes to, like, for instance, issues to health.
Okay.
We consider that. Yeah, we looked at the health status of that particular household.
Okay.
And then we also looked at other component when it comes to, like, food related issues. Are these people having access to food?
Okay.
Are they at most risk? Like
Okay.
the elderly, which household are the one
So
having
access to
can have
resources.
access?
Access to resources
Access
is
to
another
resources.
parameter you are speaking about. One is the
Yes, and then
location.
the other one,
Yeah.
yes, and then the last one, like when it comes to health, to interventions to livestock, we also looked at the categories of people, like in corrals.
Okay.
Which category of people are most affected? Which
Okay.
one their animal died in that aspect
So
of
again, the impact on their animal and economic activities. How much this type of hazardous events are affecting their economic activities and income. So that is another area we look at, the impact of this hazardous events on these animals and other income generating activities. Am I right?
Yes, sir.
absolutely, you are right.
Okay. So I think most of you are doing this, and so anyway, I will add maybe 1 or 2 points to this. So many of you understand the concept of vulnerabilities. Mostly, I think many of us are must be looking at vulnerability from the external factors. So there is a there is also the internal factor. So that also we'll look at. So vulnerability identification includes identification of target groups and regions that are susceptible to health hazards, which you already mentioned, and other environmental hazards, concentration of settlements, and detailed description of different kinds of vulnerabilities that can be caused by hazardous conditions. So different kind of vulnerabilities. It can be health vulnerability, lack of access to resources because of location, lack of food, or lack of knowledge, lack of social networks. So these are all aspects of vulnerabilities. Then human sensitivity to environmental hazards represent, say, a combination of physical exposure. How many number of people or areas are getting affected? Physical exposure can be critical infrastructure. For example, a flood is affecting a hospital, health service, no healthcare provide place, a hospital. So if it is affecting the hospital again, the particular area will be more susceptible. Then human vulnerability, reflecting the breadth of social and economic tolerance available at the same site. So are the people having these coping capabilities? Are they patient with this? Are they able to manage with their social network, kinships, or community support systems? So those are also to be looked at. Physical exposure and human vulnerability also needs to be looked at. So these are the two major issues. And when you speak about indicators of vulnerability, so how the individual is vulnerable. So that is one aspect. Then how the society as a whole is vulnerable. How it is affecting the social activities of the community, maybe education, health, or their employment, and economic vulnerability. Your infrastructure, are they getting affected? During the COVID, you must have seen all the industries, they have locked down. So the economic activities have collapsed. But in the rural areas, you must have seen that the rural area was not so much vulnerable in terms of economic activities. The agriculture continued in many of the places. So we have to look at all these indicators, how individual is affected, society is affected, the economic aspect of vulnerability. So the vulnerability analysis identifies the exposure to risk and the level of coping ability. So this both the aspects, exposure plus the coping capability, if the people are having better capabilities, better resources, better networks, better services, even if there is a risk, the vulnerability may not be too high. So the capacity issue is another important component. What type of resources you are having, what type of capabilities you are having as a society. So the vulnerability can be reduced by increasing the coping capabilities and the resource mobilization. better networks, better communication systems. So it also includes understanding of long-term factors affecting people's ability to respond to major political or physical event and their susceptibility to crisis as well, and the requirement for survival and recovery from that crisis. So this resources is a very, very important factor, and coping capability, resilience of the community, these are also very important factors. Because some of the hazardous events we can't stop them, like earthquake or major cyclones, we can't stop them, but our coping capability, our resources, our plans, our mock drills, our systems can be strengthened. Thereby we can reduce the vulnerability. People's understanding of vulnerability and the intensity and severity of impact, and what is not helping them to respond, extent of hardships, period for periods much beyond the crisis. So 5 broad categories of factors process are important in this. This include the ecosystem fragility, how the ecosystem is going to be affected because of the hazardous event, and how the economic activity is sensitive, and how the social systems, like I have perhaps talked about the cyclo supports. See, during a disaster, all our cyclo supports are affected. Like the first cyclo support is our family. During a disaster or hazardous event, everyone in the family is affected, though that support system get disrupted. And second line of support is that of the community or extended family. So that extended family is also affected by the hazardous events. So that support system gets affected. And third line of support is normally that of the community. So during a disaster, normally everyone gets affected in the community. So as such, community support is also not available. And the fourth line of support we have is that of the institutions. So during a hazardous event, these institutions are also affected. So as such, all this social cycle of support is affected. So we need to understand how this economic fragility, ecosystem fragility, social system fragility, how these cycle of supports are getting affected, how the individual decision making is getting affected. So during a disaster, people are not able to think normally, because there is a lot of trauma, stress, and problems, psychological problems. So how the people are getting affected because of this external stresses, that also needs to be understood. So these are issues we need to look at, not only just the hazard, location, and access to resources, but the resilience, the cyclo supports, the decision making process, whether people are able to take decision even during a hazardous event, what is the pattern, whether people are able to recoup immediately after they come together and support each other, what is the social support that is existing, what is the local support system leadership. So these are issues also needs to be considered while assessing vulnerability. So there are certain methodologies for assessing this vulnerability, making an inventory of what is at risk. So in case of a proposed, likely hazard, what are the inventory, what are the areas? You have to make a list of those. Maybe it is hospital, maybe it is school, maybe it is houses, maybe it is crops, maybe it is infrastructure like maybe the roads, the some places we have seen during a disaster, even the airports are affected. So they are not properly planned while building this critical infrastructure. As such, airports, when they are at they are required, they are not available. So that we need to make an inventory, assessing the vulnerability of elements. So each element, Suppose, as I said, the airport, for example. So each element of that, various components of that element, that also needs to be assessed. Vulnerability, exposure, and sensitivity. So what is the vulnerability? How much of people are exposed? What is the sensitivity, and what type of resilience is there? So that also needs to be assessed. If people are experienced and they have teams and systems, they may be more resilient. So in other cases it is not. So that needs to be analyzed. Vulnerability, sensitivity, exposure analysis. So again, how sensitive they are, how many people are exposed, those models also can be used for assessing these vulnerabilities. So first of all, make an inventory of the risk, the things which are at risk, then elements at risk, vulnerability and exposure, and resilience system which is existing there, and the exposure issue. So this way we can know assess. These methodologies can be used for assessing vulnerabilities. And however, we need to have an integrated approach to vulnerability reduction. So the individual management level measures. So at the individual level, how this can be done, the roles and responsibilities of various stakeholders. So for that, you need to have a proper plan. And so whether these roles and responsibilities are divided and given to various stakeholders, disaster management plan, then disaster emergency plans, resource management consideration and programs, so comprehensive land use planning based on total watershed management principles. So all these are also this needs to be integrated, not only at the individual level or community level, at a comprehensive level. We need to have plans, resource management systems. All this should be in place. So coming to vulnerability analysis and risk assessment, there are ISO has written about various ways of doing is lack of access to resources, whether it is material or economic resources. So it can create more vulnerability. Disintegration of social patterns. So sometimes the social systems and social support system which are existing there, during disaster, people migrate and move out to various places, and then the social system, support systems disintegrate. Degradation of the environment and inability to protect it. So this also environmental degradation. So that may also increase the vulnerability. Lack of access to information and knowledge. This is again educational vulnerability. So people who actually, in the case of Bhopal, for example, Bhopal gas tragedy, I perhaps must have mentioned earlier, the people who are knowledgeable, they have not run away from the house. They actually locked all the doors and windows, and then they stayed inside the house. They knew that while if you are running away from that particular place, you will inhale more gas, and then as such, it will affect you more. So the knowledge, the education, the awareness, so that also is another area. Then lack of public awareness, attitudinal and more motivational vulnerability, limited access to political power. In some of the countries, we have seen some of the groups are not part of the government. They are not sharing the power. So this will again increase the vulnerability. So they may have all the things, but they don't have a say in the government. So as such, the relief, the risk mitigation activities, so they may not get an equal share because they have nobody to raise their voice. So this political vulnerability is there, cultural vulnerability is there. So certain beliefs, maybe child marriage or social labels. So that also will increase the vulnerabilities. Maybe women, there is no equal share for women. or no, they are not in the government process, they don't have the voting right. So all this will increase the vulnerability. So it is not only just location specific. Even if you are trying to remove certain social evils from the society, that is also a vulnerability reduction activity. So those also needs to be considered. Weak buildings or weak individuals, physical vulnerability. I mean, people are not health-wise, they are not strong. So they may be very susceptible to various diseases. So this is also another vulnerability. So we have to look at from the multi-dimensional, multi-sectoral way the vulnerability. It is so there are various ways of looking at that. So vulnerability is not static, as I said, it is dynamic with changes in relation to shifting forces and factors in the environment, such as access to resources. So earlier, the particular location may not have had the access to resources, but due to certain interventions or your programs and projects, you are generated resources and accessibility to the people. So that perhaps will reduce the vulnerability. Okay, I think I have spoken a lot. Anybody want to add something more? I was speaking only one-sided. I would like to get your your feedback. Anybody want to share or disagree or anything? Agree or disagree or any value additions from any of you? So vulnerability is a very complex phenomenon. Anybody want to add? Okay, so let's continue.
Yes.
Nobody's adding.
So,
Okay, continue.
yes, if I really understood is that this vulnerability it should be seen from all perspective or all ramification of human
Yeah,
existence.
bilkul.
Based
Yes,
from
yes.
the availability of resources like health facilities, availability of food, knowledge, and
Yeah,
all other security aspects of human being and all other parts of the life. A human being can be
absolutely, absolutely.
vulnerable from all these perspectives.
Yes, yes.
So,
So
as
vulnerability
such,
is not, it is a very complex phenomenon and it is situation specific. So we need to look at, and it is dynamic. So if you have done a vulnerability analysis of your community 1 or 2 years back, that is may not be true today. So mean to say there should be regular assessment of vulnerability, at least on a yearly basis or something. Okay. So let us continue. So another issue is situation analysis, as I said. And it has what situation analysis recognizes 2 or 3 kinds of contingencies. First, social vulnerability is not a permanent property of a person or group, but changes in respect to a particular hazard. So people may be vulnerable to earthquake hazard, but sometimes they may not be vulnerable to flood. So again, it varies depending on the hazard. The second kind of contingency concern is the constantly changing daily, seasonal and yearly circumstance of a person, situation as regard to access to resources and power. So 5 years ago, there would have been maybe a community would have been sharing power. But 5 years down the line, that particular group or community or area may not be sharing the power. So again, the vulnerability changes. Such circumstances change dramatically as the life cycle unfolds. Physiological, anatomical changes accompany childbirth to occupational disease. So again, the vulnerability may not be same when you are an adult or when you are an old person. So different stages of your life cycle, from childbirth to old age, the vulnerability may vary. So you can't say that just gender way only women at all ages are having same type of vulnerability, or whichever group. So they may not be having, so it again changes depending on the life cycle. Finally, there is the contingency born of complex interaction of particular overlapping identities and forms of empowerment and marginalization. So there could be complex interaction between certain identities. So in those cases, empowerment may take place, or in the process, marginalization may take place. So again, this increases or decreases depending on the situation. So this needs to be kept in mind. Bardner view on vulnerability is net condition in a given geographical area arising after a consideration of pre-existing vulnerability and the response which tempers it in some measure. So again, this pre-existing vulnerability. So before a disaster, there could have been certain vulnerabilities already existing in the community that may add to further vulnerabilities. So people who were poor before the COVID, they have become more poor during the COVID. So the pre-existing vulnerabilities has increased the vulnerabilities. So these biophysical, technical, and social vulnerabilities are there, and factors are considered as relevant with regard to loss reduction. So it's basically hazard is considered, exposure is considered, preparedness level is considered, prevention measures is considered, response activities are considered. So all these factors are considered while assessing the vulnerabilities. So that is also important to look at what type of hazards are there, how many people are exposed, whether the system is having preparedness plans, mock drills or training, whether this area is has taken up certain preventive activities, or what type of response systems have been developed. So all this changes, or it brings it is again affects the vulnerabilities of the population. So differential vulnerability looks at vulnerability from a development perspective, in that the aim of policy makers should be to minimize suffering through policy designed to improve exchange relationship apart from geographical factors. So if you are through your intervention, if you are able to bring cohesion in the community, better harmony in the community, better understanding, so social capital will be built. As such, the community will have less vulnerabilities. So that is also there. So models of vulnerability analysis. So one is the capacity and vulnerability analysis. As I said, the resources, if you have more resources, what type of resources, so that you have to look at the capacities. Then pressure and release access model and sustainable livelihood model. These are the three models which are available. We will have a look at each of these models. So capacity and vulnerability analysis, this model was developed in 1980s and was initially used to relate relief programs to developmental objectives. It uses a simple matrix of three-dimensional study to prove a community's vulnerability. So it is actually, they use physical vulnerability, how poor they are, or what is the location. So that is one aspect. Then social dimension of the vulnerability, the relationship, the social cohesion, which I spoke about. And they also use motivational, how motivated people are, how involved they are, how organizationally strong they are. So those three aspects are used under this. Then pressure and release access model. This model developed in 1990s, emphasized human and man-made aspects of disasters, takes contextual factors into account for assessing vulnerability. So as I said, it is a situation specific issue. Vulnerability is perceived as moving through three successive levels in linear continuum as root causes. So for example, see, in this slide, I have talked to you about, like hazardous events. When they interact with vulnerable people, no, it may become a disaster. So we spoke about the three aspects. That is the underlying causes, dynamic pressures, unsafe conditions. So these are all creating vulnerabilities. So these three factors have to be taken into consideration while looking at pressure and release model. So underlying causes, why people are vulnerable. So again, this it will look into the root causes and what are the factors which are adding to the vulnerabilities of the people. So it may look at the lack of institutions or training or macro forces like population expansion, urbanization. So all these factors will be looked into, and also the fragile conditions. So pressure release model, they will look at all these factors while considering the vulnerability. Okay. So is it clear, this pressure and release model? Herein actually three factors are taken into consideration, like the root causes, the dynamic pressures, and the factors which are contributing further the vulnerabilities. So all this will be analyzed. Pressure release model. Okay. And then the access model focuses on livelihood strategies adopted by different communities which determine their vulnerability. See, the livelihood, sometimes drought prone areas, people know they change their livelihood. Suppose they know that there is going to be drought, so they may adopt for short-term crops which may not require so much of water. So as such, this choice will help the people reduce the vulnerabilities. This data, together with the pressure model, provides insight into practical strategies that needs to be formulated and implemented in case of each vulnerable section to reduce the vulnerability arising out of situational factors. So this model will help as to what strategy needs to be adopted by each section of the community which are facing these vulnerabilities. Then there is also sustainable livelihood model. Livelihoods model puts livelihood at the center of study for strategy formulation. Livelihood choices are made in a situation of vulnerability. Approach seeks to understand the many factors that determining people's choice of livelihood to find ways to reinforce the positive aspects. So if many times we have seen that if every year there is going to be flood in a particular area, so people may know by choice they move out of that place and they may not do the agriculture. So that is their choice, and then because of that choice, people are able to reduce the vulnerabilities. A person's livelihood is sustainable when he or she can cope with and recover from the stresses and shocks and maintain or enhance their capabilities and assets both now and in the future while not undermining the natural resource base. So this type of adaptation, this also helps the people to reduce vulnerabilities. And there are also ways of quantifying the vulnerability. Vulnerability is attempted to be quantified in order to develop specific policy to reduce vulnerability. So it can be quantified in terms of how much or how many number of people are getting affected. So vulnerability is defined as the degree of loss to a given element at risk resulting from given hazard at a given severity. So whether it is 20% loss or 30% loss, so as such we can quantify the vulnerability depending on the percentage of the element that the risk is getting affected. So maybe 20% of the buildings may be affected because of earthquake or landslides. So the vulnerability will be quantified as 20%. The vulnerability of an element is usually expressed as percentage loss suffered in case of specific element for a given hazard severity. So earthquake of the magnitude of 6 may take place and the vulnerability may be 50%. If 7 magnitude earthquake takes place, it may be a higher level. So this can be quantified and it can also be qualified. So high, low or medium, you can do that. So I think today it has become okay. Let us hear from you. What is your feedback? Have you understood the concept of vulnerability quantification? Have you gone through the material? Have you gone through the materials earlier before coming to the class? So please do go through. So mean to say there are ways of doing this analysis, vulnerability analysis methods are there. Research has been done and there are various methods this can be applied. And this is very, very important that we apply this and understand this. And again, risk assessment is interdisciplinary process. Historically, risk and vulnerability analysis had tended to examine only the structural element, that is buildings and facilities. So earlier the risk assessment was done by only engineers and they used to say, but now that a social vulnerability component is also equally important and that needs to be also looked at. So inclusive risk and vulnerability analysis includes critical facility analysis, environmental analysis, societal analysis, build environmental analysis and economic analysis. So all this, earlier the risk assessment was done by the only engineers. Now, because of the vulnerability issue, capacity issue, resilience issue, critical facility analysis, environmental analysis, societal, social capital which are built up, that needs to be analyzed. And also economic analysis. So this needs to be done by a team of experts. That is important. Again, there is a relationship between vulnerability and capacity. As you increase your capacities, your vulnerability can be reduced. The capacity balance is negative, vulnerability quotient is high. And if it is positive, vulnerability quotient is low. So depending on the capacity, the vulnerability can be reduced. Within the context of disaster management, development is decided as a process that reduces vulnerabilities and increase the capabilities. Vulnerability is multidimensional, inclusive approach is needed for this. So vulnerability analysis requires an inclusive approach, a multidisciplinary approach to do this one. And people should be at the center of this vulnerability analysis, and there should be a proper system for that, and it should be inclusive. It should include all the stakeholders, and empowering the local community by providing for their increased participation in decision making will reduce the vulnerability. And it needs to be constantly monitored and evaluated. The attempt is to understand underlying causes of hazards rather than merely addressing the symptoms. Why people are or why we are having so many people living in landslide prone areas or informal settlements? What are the root causes? That needs to be understood. And there needs to be a holistic approach, which will include, as I said, all these factors. There are various models like tier fund model, which speaks about 5 categories of analysis: economic, natural, physical, human, and social vulnerabilities. Terrican, in his framework, considers vulnerability in terms of 5 components: initial well-being, self-protection, social protection, livelihood resilience, social capital. So initial well-being, that pre-existing vulnerability, and self-protection, how motivated people are to use protective equipments and protective systems, how motivated people are to use seatbelt or driving licenses, I mean, after proper training, or the warning systems, how people are motivated, how society, is there a social force, is there a social dynamics to risk reduction? So that also, whether a community as a whole is helping the society to look at social protection and livelihood resilience. I spoke about a choice of livelihood and the social capital which is being built in the community, whether social cohesion, harmony, and network. So these are also to be looked at. So various people have looked at vulnerabilities using various components. So we would like to say that there should be an integrated approach, and there are toolkits that spatial dimension information is provided on physical environment, human activities, groups of people, and the caste system, or the social cohesion, social capital issues, and daily. So how people are know what is the time, you can understand after charting out various activities being carried out by different groups of people, and what is the time schedule. That will also give us an understanding as to what would be the vulnerability of that society if you do a sample study. And we can use flowcharts or comparisons of various groups, and all this thing can be done, and with this we can have a proper assessment of vulnerabilities. Okay. So thank you very much. If you have any question to ask, I would request you to go through the reading material once more. And next time when I take the next presentation, if you have any doubts, you may ask. So vulnerability and risk, and this is a very complex scenario, complex issue. So we need to look at from a multi-dimensional aspect, and it is a very dynamic aspect. It changes. and it has got relation with capacity. It has a relation with the type of hazards, the magnitude of hazard, and the exposure issues. All these are factors to conclude. So if you have any question, I can open up for maybe 2-3 minutes. Yeah, please.
Yeah, mine is just a comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the first place, I really need to give thanks to you for this nice presentation.
Actually, it
And
is a very, there are 4 chapters. So within this
yes,
time, I tried to give an overview about this. I have not gone in detail, but anyway, thank you so much.
yeah. And the second one, to my colleagues, these particular topics, risk assessment and vulnerability analysis. In fact, the time when I was applying, when I looked at the units, it was actually the areas where I was so much interested. And on the issues of disaster management, to me personally, it sits at the heart.
Okay.
Because in aspect of disaster management, you need to know exactly what vulnerability is all about. Its analysis. If you happens to understand this one very well, I think it will give the real concept of this course. And today lecture, I do consider it very, very, very important for us in this course.
Yeah. I hope I would request also some of you to go through this reading material and also see what type of application is there in your countries. And I would suggest you can share some of this if in case you get some of the case studies. You can share in the WhatsApp group, and that will also add value to this. In the reading material, IGNO has given certain case studies of India, but it would be much more relevant for you to look at case studies in your own countries.
Yes, actually, you mentioned the exact point I'm actually trying to come up with, and there is one thing I also wanted to request from you for all of us is that vulnerability. You talked of vulnerability indicators of vulnerability, the tools, the available tools that are being used for all this assessment. And I will request you, if time will allow, or if you can give us a special session on the best tools that are used in analyzing vulnerability. I would really appreciate this. And the current context, like where I am currently working, the MNE team are using this for assessment. And if we are also better oriented in this, I think it will be really very important for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is just
No, I will talk with the IGNO officials, and I'll see what best can be done. But this is yeah. So thank you so much. Anybody else? I think one more. Salim has actually raised your hand. Am I right?
Yes, I did, sir. Sir, as one of my colleague Tombe just rightly have come with a conceptual issue that this main concept, it is all about the cause itself. The concept that we are going through right now, it is all about the cause. As yes, as we can see, and as we have observed, the main conceptual issues that it is all about the cause that is trying to highlight the main issues on disaster management. And secondly, about what my colleague Tombe has came up with about the analytical instruments, and so on. I think I have undergone one of analysis that went on. It was almost last year. So there are some tools that we had made use of, which is we went on the base community targeted areas that has a disaster on floods issue, on this COVID-19 due to which has affected their economical and financial stability. So we made use of CBT teams. CBT teams were sent to those community-based targeted areas that were affected. That were affected. So we met there and met the stakeholders. They gave us the harmonized list of those people mainly affected with such a issue. So we came up with the harmonized list, then assessed them into the mail list. Then after some weeks, we sent a field assistants, field workers that that will be mainly what should I call them, enumerators as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have done surveys and all that.
Yes.
Must have done some field surveys.
Yes, field survey, and in addition, those people that their name has appeared in the harmonized list that has been given by the stakeholders of that base community, they have been given some financial support. Through their bank account. What the enumerators were assigned to is to have the main number of the people per households for persons with the disabilities, at times all ages, and much alike of them. We had many of them in thousands. They have went for round 1 up to round 12. Many of them have been benefited by such kind of program, which is the federal government program that went through each and every state down to the local government angle of every unit across these states here in Nigeria. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. I would request you to share maybe with your WhatsApp group if you have 1 or 2 pager write-up on this particular process which you are done. That will definitely help the others also. So you can make it like a small case study or something, and you can since you are already undergone that process, that will help the others also. This is my suggestion.
All right, sir. Suggested, granted, sir. As you wish. I will try to, sir.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Yeah, Ibrahim, you wanted to share something?
Sir, no, sir.
Okay.
So okay, sir. Let me say something again. Sir.
You want to share something?
Sir, like this vulnerability, like this course, sir. Actually, when you started this lecture, I was attending late, but I observed that this lecture that you present is very important. So, like a place where I'm living now in Jigao State, they normally use experience flooding every year.
Okay.
So I want to use these presentations to look at.
I will, as I said, I will share this one. Let me go through once more, basing on the interaction we had.
Okay,
and
sir.
Then I will share it with the IGNO officials, and they will in turn share with you.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for your patient listening and attention, and also interaction. Thank you so much. So shall we close for today?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, sir, we can close. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
It has been a wonderful presentation and very in-depth one.
Adamu, I
Great.
thought you were
Yes.
absent. Why is Mr.
Adamu.
Haya?
Tombe,
Yahya
how are you?
Bye.
All
Tombe,
of you are on
Bye
transit
bye all
today.
colleagues. Bye. Yeah.
all of you, I will
I am
send you.
on
I will send you
transit
my
today. Oh,
screen. I will send you my screen today.
Bye.
I am on transit. My
Yeah.
network was
I'm late.
crashing.
Yesterday I wasn't around. I
Even
came back to
Yes.
my
Adamu,
location
even
today.
Adamu, he did great things, wonderful things. He said